Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much to the Bermans and to EMET for hosting this event, the Bermans for hosting us in your wonderful home, and EMET for organizing this lovely event this evening. Really, it's interesting because what Sarah was talking about was this idea that we can continue doing the exact same thing we're doing and expecting to get different results in different iterations of the same act, which is, of course, silly. But, you know, one of the things that I discuss in my book is it's also extremely dangerous, and really the insanity comes at a cost in terms of the ability of the United States to understand reality. And if you can't understand reality in the Middle East, you're necessarily going to be incapable of developing policies that are both rational and effective and advancing America's national security interests that are so enormous and widespread in the region. So now, just to back up a little bit, let's just talk about one news story that came into my email inbox just an hour and a half ago. I mean, so we understand that this isn't a constant stream of insanity. The latest information is that the White House has announced that it doesn't have a problem with the fact that Hamas, which is designated by the U.S. State Department rightly as a foreign terrorist organization that the United States is barred from having anything to do with in any way, shape, or form, or providing aid and assistance to. They don't have a problem that this foreign terrorist organization, which is also a genocidal jihadist movement that calls not only for the annihilation of Israel, but the genocide of world Jewry, as well as the obliteration of Western civilization and its replacement with an Islamic caliphate. They don't have a problem with Hamas being part of a Palestinian unity government because aside from the fact that they're insane, because they believe Abu Mazen, the PLO chief, who just signed this unity agreement with Hamas, when he says that it doesn't matter who's a member of my coalition government, I'm going to call the shots, and which in and of itself is funny, because Abbas refuses to recognize that Israel has a right to exist, refuses to make peace with Israel, has already rejected numerous offers of Palestinian statehood that have been proffered by Israeli and most recently American leaders. President Obama in March offered him a very gracious offer on behalf of America that Israel was going to give. And he, as he did with Ehud Olmert in 2008, walked away from the White House and never responded to Obama's offer. So, you know, this guy also has a track record, but because the United States has so much faith in Abbas as a peacemaker, they're going to take him at his word that it's fine to continue paying him $500 million a year in U.S. military assistance to his army that the United States military has been building since 2006, and that the United States is going to continue direct finance of the budget that he is going to share not only with Hamas, but also with the Islamic Jihad, which is a puppet of the Iranian regime in Tehran. So this is crazy. Now, we know that there is a unique craziness about the Obama administration that involves really thinking not only in terms of Israel, but in terms of U.S. allies throughout the world, and indeed, to a degree, the United States itself, are the problem that are causing all of the difficulties in the world. And we saw from Honduras to U.S. allies, South Korea against North Korea, Japan against China, South Korea against China, Philippines against China, that the United States has been siding with America's adversaries against America's allies. You see it as well in Eastern Europe when bowing to Russian will, even before the Crimea invasion, that They sided with the Russians against the Poles and the Czechs with the stationing of the X-band radar systems in those countries, and so on and so forth. So this is a general sort of gestalt of the Obama administration in terms of their rationale of foreign policy, or irrationale of foreign policy, as the case may be. But really, when we look at the Middle East and Israel, we see that there are very strong similarities. In fact, to the extent that it's very difficult to see the distinction between Obama's preference for the likes of the PLO over Israel. This is something that was shared with the Bush administration, and was shared with the Clinton administration. And the United States' willingness to suffer horrible behavior by the PLO actually goes back to the early 1970s and the Nixon administration. And we have to think about, why is this and what does this mean? That the United States has consistently been willing to turn a blind eye to bad behavior by the PLO, whether led by Arafat or led by Abbas, and always want to find fault with Israel to explain away the horrid behavior of the PLO. And here we have to look at the two-state paradigm, because the two-state paradigm is, not to put too fine a point on it, but it is an anti-Semitic paradigm of policymaking. It is a paradigm that is predicated on the notion that the Jews are to blame for all of the pathologies of the Middle East. And let me just explain. The two-state paradigm claims that the root cause of all of the problems in the Middle East is the absence of a Palestinian state west of the Jordan River. Now, who is to blame for the absence of that state in the minds of those who are advocating on behalf of the two-state solution? Well, from their perspective, the guilty party is Israel. Israel is to blame for the absence of a Palestinian state, the establishment of which is going to solve everything, because Israel is greedy, because Jews have land greed, because Jews won't give up their settlements, because, as John Kerry said, poof, we destroyed everything because we said that we were building apartments for Jews in the Gilo neighborhood of Jerusalem, which is just as much of a part of Jerusalem as Rehavia is. So, you know, to the notion that the Gilo, this massive neighborhood in southern Jerusalem, is some sort of an outpost community, some sort of a rogue entity inside of an Israeli body politic that is otherwise acceptable, is really indistinguishable from somebody claiming that Neve Sha'anan, or in Haifa, or Shchunat HaTikva in Tel Aviv, are somehow or another blights on the landscape of the Middle East for existing. I mean, it is simply not a settlement in any way, shape, or form. And so the United States is saying that this is the cause of the absence of peace. They're saying it's the Jews' fault. It's the Jews' fault that there is no peace. And now, to understand how deeply rooted this pathological view that all of the problems in the Middle East redound to the absence of a Palestinian state, we can look no further than former President Bill Clinton in a 2010 speech. I think he made it before the Chaim Saban Forum here at Brookings. He said that the establishment of a Palestinian state would end 50% of the terrorism, not only in the region, but throughout the entire world. He said no single act would do more to advance the cause of counterterrorism or whatever, strike a deeper blow at terrorism than the establishment of a Palestinian state. Now, I mean, that is really an astonishing remark, except that it isn't at all surprising, because this was a position of Condoleezza Rice, of George Bush, of Hillary Clinton, of Barack Obama, of John Kerry, and so on and so forth. This is a consensus view in the US foreign policy community, and of course, throughout Europe. And it's completely nuts. I mean, it's based upon rejection of everything having to do with reason. You cannot reasonably look on the facts on the ground in the Middle East and come to the conclusion that the establishment of a Palestinian state is going to solve 50% of the problem of terrorism, not only in the region, but throughout the world. By pushing, you cannot say that and view it as a rational statement, because it simply isn't. And so that's why it's clear, in a way, that it is rooted in anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism itself is a prejudice that is based upon the rejection of reason, right? It is based upon completely removing your brain from anything that involves cause and effect, right? And wrapping yourself around a concept that empowers you as a member of the mob, that empowers you as an ignoramus, right? Because you can say these things with utter conviction despite the fact that it is completely irrational. And therefore, it is basically textbook anti-Semitism. And so this is a problem, because when you have US policymakers who truly believe something that is completely irrational, then try to figure out how to deal with a situation like the war in Iraq, or Afghanistan, or Iran's nuclear weapons program, or the threat of the Muslim Brotherhood, or the opportunity presented by the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, or which horse to back in Syria, or what the nature of Hezbollah is. You can't. They can't understand it, because at the very foundation of their understanding of the region is a lie, a pernicious lie that makes it impossible for them to think straight. I mean, when I was going into Iraq with the 3rd Infantry Division, I came at it from an Israeli. So we crossed the border from Kuwait into Iraq, and I had really the privilege of being with the forwardmost battalion in the 3rd Infantry Division, so the first over the line. And we were driving past Nasiriyah in the south, and there were all of these Iraqis standing on the side of the highway. We stopped for some reason, and they were all going thumbs up, yay, Bush, go USA. And the guys were taking out candies and giving them to them. And in my mind, and in their minds, in the men's minds, what they saw was Paris in 1944. And in my mind, I saw Lebanon in 1982, because this is exactly what happened when the IDF went into South Lebanon. The Christians and the Shiites threw rice at our soldiers and welcomed us as their liberators from the PLO. And then they chewed us up and vomited us out 18 years later. So I'm looking at this and saying, okay, this is going to be a problem. I wonder if these Americans understand. Oh, this is just like Paris. Oh, they don't understand. They don't understand. And indeed, the first unit that suffered a terrorist attack in the operation was the battalion that I was with when you had 4 men who were killed at a roadside bombing conducted by an Iraqi NCO. And then the Palestinians named a square in Ramallah in his honor just the same week. And so, yeah, I got it. They didn't get it. Now, why didn't they get it? The truth of the matter is that if you were an American military planner trying to put together an invasion of Iraq and a plan of action in Iraq, the only military precedent that actually mattered, that was relevant, was Israel's military presence in Lebanon, and particularly the '82 invasion, but also subsequent years with the security zone and all the rest of it. They didn't look at it once. In my book, I cite a conversation between Richard Armitage in the State Department and Doug Feith in Defense Department, which was really the only discussion they had of Israel, where Armitage said to Feith that he didn't think that the United States could invade Iraq until there was progress in the peace process. And, I mean, what happened in Iraq is almost exactly what happened to Israel in Lebanon. In fact, in a way, it's exactly what happened to Israel and Lebanon. So Israelis understood what the United States was getting into and warned against the invasion, actually, as a consequence. But nobody was listening to us because we were the occupiers. The Americans were going into, we occupied Lebanon. The United States was going into Iraq to liberate it from Saddam, and obviously there was going to be a distinction, and everybody was going to view them differently than they viewed Israel, and they didn't. And this is just one consequence. This is just one consequence of many of this insane notion that Israel is not really an ally of the United States. It's a strategic burden, which we know is only really supported by the United States because of a nefarious Israel lobby that is run by a bunch of American Jews that suffer from dual loyalty, right? And so, you know, it has nothing to do with the fact that Israel is an ally, that the same people who are enemies of Israel view the United States as the enemy of everything that they hold dear. It isn't that we have the same strategic interests. We have very similar military doctrines. We have the same values. We stand in the eyes of our joint enemies for the exact same ideals of democracy and human freedom, which they reject openly and declaredly. It has nothing to do with anything. It has nothing to do with the fact that we both have the same economic interests and open markets, free exchange of commodities and ideas across the world. No, it has nothing to do with that whatsoever. The United States is only supporting Israel because of the Israel lobby, we would believe. And therefore, it doesn't really matter what happens in Iraq. We don't have to think about the demographic mix of that country and the tensions between the various demographic groups that are very, very similar to the situation in Lebanon. We don't have to think about any of that because, as Armitage said, really what success or failure in Iraq hinges on is whether Israel is making concessions to the PLO, which we, by the way, also saw in the Baker what's his name, report that came out in 2006 that was calling for the United States to have a staged withdrawal from Iraq, but that it would only be successful if Israel gave the Golan Heights to Syria and had progress in the peace process regarding Israeli withdrawals from Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem to PLO. So that this is not a serious thought pattern, right? This is a pattern, but it's not of thought. It's of visceral reactions to reality that have no connection whatsoever to reason. And you get in trouble when you adopt a foreign policy that's based on that sort of non-thought. And so we can't be surprised that we have gotten to the sort of reductio ad absurdum of the Obama administration, which, by the way, is not unprecedented. I mean, we had the same very similar situation with the Bush administration when the PLO started having these unity deals with Hamas, beginning in 2007. Wasn't quite sure, and maybe we can finesse it. Let's call in the lawyers and talk about how do we, you know, fix this. Let's square that circle and figure out a way to give a hechsher to Hamas, right? I mean, stop and think for a second, right? Could you please stop and think for a second what American interest is advanced by this? You want to just for a second explain how purifying a genocidal terrorist organization is, forget genocide, a terrorist group that murders babies, okay? How about that? How does that advance America's interests? Well, because then Israel will give up Jerusalem and then everything will be fine. And then if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, it won't matter because everybody will be happy. Happy, 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 happy.
How is releasing murderers a confidence-building measure?
Right, exactly. How is releasing murders a confidence-building measure? I mean, this is really like the prophets, you know, black is white and white is black, right? I mean, here's America lobbying for the release of murderers from prison. And of course, it's not the first time, and we've had this with successive administrations. Again, this is a bipartisan pathology, right? Now, okay, so that's part one of my book. The question is, what what do we do? And we can also talk for 1 second about what the impact of this paradigm has had on Israel, right? What does it mean for Israel that we're operating under a paradigm that is predicating it on blaming the Jews? Blaming the Jews. 50% of the terrorism, not just in the region, but throughout the entire world. Hey, you stupid Jewish state, I am so sick and tired of taking my shoes off at the airport. It is your fault. Give up Jerusalem already, right? 50% of the terrorism will disappear not only in the region, but throughout the world if a Palestinian state is brought into existence. Well, if you're an Israeli diplomat and you are operating under a national policy which is predicated on accepting the two-state solution, how easy is it going to be for you to defend Israel's rights? It will be impossible. How can you defend yourself when the milieu that you exist within is dedicated to the proposition that everything is your fault? You don't have rights, right? Jerusalem is occupied territory that belongs to a people that had never existed before 1969, right? That no nation on the face of the planet ever claimed as their capital. Aside from you, you are occupying it. It's somebody else's. Gilo is an illegal settlement. Not to mention the old city. Forget about that. Building General Staff headquarters for the IDF on Mount Scopus. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Nobody mentions the massacre of the doctors and the nurses going to Mount Scopus in that convoy in 1948 that killed how many of them? 130 doctors and nurses killed? No, nobody talks about that. It's all Israel's fault. Now, if you're occupying Jerusalem, not to mention, Gush Etzion, where I'm just buying a house, by the way, you are the problem. You are the problem. Jews living in Hebron, forget about it. Beit El, forget about it. Right? The cradle of Jewish civilization and the heart and soul of the Jewish people, Jerusalem, that belongs to another people. And the fact that you're there is the source of all of the world's difficulties. How do you defend yourself as an Israeli diplomat? Because you are representing a government that accepted this nonsense as their central policy. Oh yes, we are committed to a two-state solution, says Prime Minister Netanyahu and Prime Minister Olmert and Prime Minister this and Prime Minister that. We want peace. Well, yes, of course we want peace, but not that way. And by the way, let's just think for a second about the Palestinians. Do they want a Palestinian state? No, absolutely not. Yes, they want the destruction of Israel, but let's just look at Abbas for a second. He's looking around. He sees what happened to Gaddafi. He sees what happened to Mubarak. He sees what's going on in Syria. And he knows he's demanding a right of free immigration for all of the millions of Arabs who live in UN-run camps in Syria, in Lebanon, in Jordan, that are and have been controlled by terrorist organizations since 1950, right? Who do they like better, Zawahiri or Abbas? What is going to happen if he has that state? Well, they're going to flood across the border together with their brethren from the jihads in Iraq and in Syria, who can't be stopped because they're heroes, and he is going to be hung. And he and his family are going to die, and all of his advisors will die. And he knows that. So he's never going to accept a Palestinian state. So is that good? So great, let's go. We have a shared interest. Let's just go with Abbas, right? Well, here's the problem, is he has another interest. Because the only way he can sell the legitimacy of his leadership when his term of office expired in January of 2009 is by proving to the Palestinians that he's their guy. And he proves to the Palestinians that he's their guy by constantly escalating the political warfare that he enacts against Israel to advance the cause of Israel's delegitimization and criminalization in the international arena, and by constantly escalating terrorist activities and anti-Jewish incitement among Palestinians under his control. So that, true, he shares an interest in us with with us in maintaining Israeli control over the Jordan Valley that he insists that Israel renounce control over. But he cannot continue to rule unless he is constantly working to weaken Israel to the point where we lose our alliances with the United States, we lose our alliances with the Europeans, not that they're in great shape anyway, due to the past 20 years of our embrace of a paradigm that makes it impossible, thank you very much, how did you know, to defend ourselves. So what do we do? Gosh. Well, one of the things that we've had happen over the past several, really since 2000, when, as Sarah said, you know, the Camp David fiasco made clear that peace wasn't going to be coming from this idea of making peace with the PLO. Well, they've been telling us, well, now it's not because of peace that you have to appease Abbas, that you have to cough up Jerusalem, not allow Jews to exercise their rights to property. Imagine, this is an American demand to deny Jews their property rights. Not Arabs. Arabs can build, that's fine. Only Jews, on the basis of their being Jews, they are not allowed to exercise their right to property in Jerusalem, in Judea, and Samaria. That is an official American position. Jews must be denied property rights. That's amazing, isn't it?
It's un-American.
Yes, it is un-American, or un-American in the sense of what America's supposed to be.
And it's anti-Semitic.
Of course it's anti-Semitic. That's the point. But we're told this, and we're told that if we don't continue on this game, this loser's game, this sucker's game, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to be overrun. Right? They're having more babies than we are, and therefore they're going to outnumber us within, you know, a month or two, right? And they're going to be more Arabs than Jews west of the Jordan River, and they're going to demand equal rights, and they're going to end Israel's existence as a Jewish state or as a democracy. And then, as John Kerry so eloquently put it, Israel will become an apartheid state. Thanks. So this is what we've been told. This is what we've been hearing, and thank you. And Israeli leaders are saying, Tzipi Livni, the justice minister, Ehud Olmert, even Netanyahu to a degree, are saying, you know, we can't risk a binational state. We have to maintain Israel's Jewish majority in perpetuity, and as a consequence, we have to make a deal with Abbas. Well, we have to look at this two ways. One is from the perspective of the actual figures, and the other one is the perspective of what would be the demographic reality if such a Palestinian state were to be created. So let's start with the latter. Again, to go back to Abbas's nightmare of actually getting what he claims that he wants, sovereign state west of the Jordan River, that would lead to him being hung. Well, after they're done hanging him, or even while they're doing it, because they can do a lot of things at once. They multitask. They can probably text also, but well, they're going to be pouring over the border. I mean, we're talking about a divided Jerusalem here. You walk in through the Damascus gate and you come out the Jaffa gate, right? It's divided, but you come in Palestine, you leave the old city, you're in Israel. How difficult is it going to be? You go across the border in Kfar Saba. Oh, somebody wants to tell me they have that wall. That's really going to solve everything because you have an army, U.S. trained, of course, that is operating there, that are being inundated by members of Al-Qaeda. And they're going to have a problem because of that wall. Not. You ever heard of TNT? Just blow it up. What's so difficult about that? They die, so what? They go to heaven. They don't mind. They worship death. Not a deterrent, not a deterrent. So we're going to be pinned down with millions of people flooding across the Jordan River. And we're going to have indefensible borders. I mean, that's what everybody's talking about. 9 miles wide is at its narrowest point. Jerusalem, a divided city. An Israeli society, by the way, that is completely shattered from within by the concussive consequence of trying to forcibly expel 500,000 Jews from their homes and transferring their property to our sworn enemies. And this is going to work how? That's the demographic problem, right? You were talking about 4, 5 million, 10 million, who knows how many millions. People streaming over that border. That is the demographic balance that we have to be concerned about, and that is where demography becomes an existential threat to Israel. Of course, it's also a strategic threat to Israel, but it's a demographic threat to Israel as well. And then we have the numbers, actually, of what the situation is on the ground now. So first of all, that thing about Palestinians reproducing at a higher rate than Jews, no, Jews are reproducing at a higher rate than they are. We're having more babies than they are. You know, it's one of the dirty little secrets nobody wants to talk about, but it works out that Jews know how to go forth and multiply. We do. We do. And we're doing it. The average Israeli family has over 3 children per woman. This is, of course, you know, it has no peer in the Western world, to be sure, which is why everybody assumes that we must have fertility rates the equivalent of France or maybe the Reformed Jewish community in the United States, which is, I think, 1.1 child per woman. The lowest in the Western world. The lowest demographic group in terms of reproduction is the Reformed Jewish community. Interestingly, a little bit of trivia. But Israel is not that. That is not Israel. Israel is having 3.04 children per woman, and it keeps increasing. I mean, that's this year's figures. Last year's figures, it was 2.98. It just keeps going up and going up. Among native-born Israelis, it's 3.5. And it just keeps going up. Aliyah. We've had a 300% increase in Aliyah rates from France in the first quarter of 2014, and it just keeps going up from Belgium, from Switzerland. Why? Well, things are pretty lousy there and things are pretty good in Israel. We can make them a better offer, and that's why they're coming. That's why they're coming. Give the South African Jews a couple more years. How many do you think are going to remain there? I mean, they're already leaving. They're mainly going to Australia. But as each year, year in, year out, Israel is able to make a better offer to Jewish immigrants, and that's why more and more are coming. We are at the cusp of a major wave of Aliyah to Israel. Thank God. But, you know, even from that perspective, now let's take on the Palestinians for a second. Are the masses seeking to immigrate into the Palestinian Authority? No, to the contrary, they're hemorrhaging immigration. Everybody who can get out is trying to get out. Over 16,000 young Palestinians left last year. And when you take it as a sum total, those are figures that are much lower probably than the real numbers, because the real numbers are showing an annual rate constantly increasing, going up to 40 and 50,000 Palestinians leaving. And this is when you have an overall population base of 1.6 million Palestinians in Judea and Samaria. So these are very significant numbers. Not a lot of children. 2.91 children per woman among Palestinian Arabs in the West Bank. And among Israeli Arabs, actually, the numbers are still higher. They're 3.5, but it, again, is consistently going down. And this, by the way, is not surprising because you have a collapse in demographic rates of fertility throughout the Islamic world. Throughout the Islamic world, Iran went from nearly 8 children per woman in 1979, at the time of the revolution. Today, 1.6, below replacement rate. There's never been a collapse like this in recorded history. What's happening in the Muslim world. Same in Saudi Arabia, same in Egypt, same in Yemen, same in Bahrain. Country after country after country, you're getting a collapse in fertility rates because as you have urbanization and education of women, fertility rates go down. In Israel, the exact opposite happens. We get richer, we have more kids. Why? Because we're happy. So the demography actually, contrary to what all of the people who are telling us that we have to give up Jerusalem would have us believe, is one of Israel's chief assets. Today, if Israel were to apply its laws and through it, its sovereignty to Judea and Samaria, it would still have a 2/3 Jewish majority west of the Jordan. Assuming that most of those people would not receive Israeli citizenship because they wouldn't abide by the conditions of Israel's citizenship law, we're looking at a situation where not only would you already have a very strong Jewish majority while incorporating this population within Israel's body politic, but given the demographic trends of today, you can assume that by 2030, or you can project out, and of course demographic projections are historically wrong, but still, if we just base our projections on current trends, then we see that Israel would reconstitute at 75% Jewish majority by 2035. So we're talking about a blip in time in terms of getting that convulsion and then moving on. And by the way, there's no country today in the world that has managed to incorporate sudden increases in its population and the shocks to its system and then move on from there. And now, how would this even work? What would be the model? Well, the model would actually be an integrationist model. And luckily, due to the so-called Arab Spring, the Israeli Arab community is, again, not unlike Abu Mazen, looking around the region, looking at what's happening particularly in Syria, but also in Egypt to a very, very significant degree, and saying, you know what, let's rethink that Arab nationalist or Islamic identity that we've been upholding for the past 20 years. Maybe we're actually, most important thing we have going for ourselves is that Israeli citizenship that we're holding. We've seen a 300% increase in Christians, Israelis, Arabs, conscription rates in the past 2 years. They're joining the IDF. It's not just that they're saying we should integrate, they're saying we should completely integrate into Israeli society. We want to join the military. I talk about this in my book. And now it's an incipient trend because these are people who have been subverted for the past 40 years by the PLO to embrace a pan-Arab or an Islamic identity and reject Israel and its right to exist. So this is a revolutionary change that's going on among the Israeli Arab community, that they're saying, no, no, no. In fact, the Christians more and more are saying, they demanded that the Knesset change their identity in the identity cards for the purpose of citizenship. They no longer want to be identified as Arabs. They want to be identified as Christians. And when you think about the Christians, the reason why this is so dramatic is because the pan-Arab movement was actually started by American missionaries in Lebanon in the 19th century. And for the Christians, the notion of a pan-Arab identity was something that was going to save them from the second-class status or third-class status of dhimmis that they suffered from under Islamic rule. So for the Christians, pan-Arabism, which later morphed into pan-Arab National Socialism or Nazism under Nasser and the Baathists, this was their saving grace. I mean, this is why Tariq Aziz was Saddam's foreign minister. You know, George Habash, one of the most prolific PLO monsters, Christian, communist, Christian. Because it was their way of getting out from under the jackboot of Islamic laws of Omar that made them into dhimmis. And so the fact that now, after being really the champions of this identity for well over 100 years, you're seeing Christians saying, you know what, we're not actually Arabs at all. That's a misnomer. We're Assyrians, we're Armenians. Don't call us Arabs. The fact that we speak Arabic is because our lands were invaded by Arabs, but we're not Arabs. Don't insult us. We're Christian Israelis. Thank you very much for asking. And by the way, we're joining the IDF. This is happening also among Muslims who are saying, I don't mind fighting Muslims, I'm fighting for my village. Fine, fight for your village in Golani. And they are. And these are trends that are going on. In fact, now there's a war really going on among the Israeli Christians with people like Hanin Zouabi, who is a pan-Arabist, who was on the Mavi Marmara, a terror ship from Turkey. She's a member of Knesset. She's really making death threats against the Arab Christians, or not Arab Christians, who are pushing for integration into Israeli society. And I bring data in my book to show that as well. The Arab Muslims are more and more embracing their Israeli identity in Jerusalem, They're lining up to receive Israeli citizenship for the first time. And of course, the Golan Heights Druze always rejected Israeli citizenship. But again, they're looking over the border at Syria saying, you know what? Never mind that whole, we're Syrians. No, no, no. Give us those passports we were discussing since 1981. We'd like to be Israeli citizens. So this is something that's happening. I mean, we have to understand that the revolutionary wave that is going through the Islamic world has not passed over Israel. It's passed over the Israeli Jews because we know, Ba'athist, Al-Qaeda, Iran, they all hate us. Let's just protect ourselves and batten down the hatches. But the Arabs of Israel are being profoundly impacted by what's happening in the Islamic world. And it's true, we see in the news every once in a while we have Arab Israelis who are stopped at the border when they're trying to infiltrate back from Syria, where they've gone through jihadist training, or Jordan. But the real story are the people who aren't doing that, who are saying, no, 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 no. And so that's a kind of model that Israel can encourage and has to cultivate, and I think we'll also find an incredible amount of interest, we already are without really doing anything, among the Arabs, not only of Israel, sovereign Israel today, but also in Judea and Samaria, who would accept that as a much better offer than anything else that they can possibly imagine. Now, I think what we have to understand, and I want to stop because I want to leave time for Q&A. I think what we have to realize, just from my very brief summary of what I discuss in my book, that we are living at a very historic time. One of the reasons that the myth of the two-state solution, this anti-Semitic notion, was able to take root was because for generations, really, there hasn't seemed to be any movement in the Arab world, right? I mean, we could always say, and people like me have always been saying, why are you acting like the Arabs are objects? They're actors. They're making decisions on a daily basis. They have values. They're acting in accordance with those values and their interests as human beings. Why do you think that Israel and the United States are the only actors in the Middle East? It's crazy. But you could say that, and yet then it was Hosni Mubarak, who has been the president of Egypt since 1981, and before him came Sadat, and before him came Nasser. It was the same regime since the 1950s. Same thing in Syria, right? The Baathists took over in the 1960s. No real movement, and you had the dynastic succession. Father replacing son, whether in a monarchy or in a presidency, it didn't matter. It really didn't seem like anything was changing in the Arab world. It didn't seem like anything was ever going to move. They were all the same, and everything was the same, and the only dynamic place there was Israel. Now it's impossible to claim that. What's happening today really hasn't happened since the end of World War I, which is why suddenly people are talking about Sykes-Picot and going back into their dusty history volumes from undergraduate, trying to remember how this even came about. What this means is that, yes, there are incredible threats that are facing the Jewish state that we have to contend with, but there are also incredible opportunities. And we, for the first time really, have the ability, simply by being good, really by being ourselves, to change the way that Arab Israelis and the Palestinians as well relate to Israel and make that cost-benefit analysis in their lives. We never really had the ability to do that, which is why we said, fine, we don't care that the Egyptians aren't really at peace with us. So long as the Sinai remains demilitarized, it's fine. And now we're asking the Egyptian military to come in and militarize the Sinai because we're facing a new threat there of the jihad. But for better or for worse. But I mean, things are changing in every single level. And we have to embrace that change and try to understand it, try to recognize not only its threats, but also its opportunities, and craft policies that are dynamic, that are flexible, that are capable of protecting Israel under a number of situations, rather than saying, everybody knows what the solution is. You know, it was written on the Rosetta Stone of foreign policy making back in, 1922. And it has ever been thus, and it shall ever be thus, and nothing shall ever change. It's not true. It was never true. It has failed for 90 years, and it will continue to fail because it has to fail, because it's based on lies. But we are at a time now where we can change things. I think that what Israel has to do is apply our laws, and through them our sovereignty to Judea and Samaria, and assert our rights. I don't think we ever get anywhere by not asserting our rights, by saying, well, we only need it for defensive purposes. We can't leave because without it, we don't have defensible borders. I mean, if we're occupying somebody else's land, nobody cares that we need it to defend ourselves. Who cares? It's not yours, And by the way, I'm sick and tired of taking off my shoes every time that I want to get on a plane, right? So leave it. I mean, it would be like somebody coming into your kitchen and saying, all I need is your kitchen because my kitchen is no good, it's ugly, and I just really need to make a sandwich, and I'm just going to take your kitchen over, right? Because I need it, because I like sandwiches. Who cares, right? Get the heck out of my house. My kitchen, not yours. Go hungry, I don't care. Here, take a quarter, go buy yourself something. But get out. That's basically the approach that more and more people are taking to Israel, right? So when we say we just need it for defensive purposes, people say, I don't care. It's your concocted purpose, defensive interests, and go away. We don't want to hear from you anymore. So on the other hand, if we say, look, excuse me, where is the international law that says that sovereign rights to Judea and Samaria go to anybody other than the Jews? Non-binding UN General Assembly resolutions? That's not law. The only binding international law regarding the apportionment of sovereign rights over the land of Israel were in the League of Nations mandate, and they gave full sovereign rights to the Jewish people. It's ours. Game over. Game over. It's ours. We didn't make up 3,500 years of Jewish history, but they're making up this whole idea that they're the sons of Canaanites. I mean, come on. We're going to suddenly he's going to say, my great-grandfather had a Palestinian T-Rex, when he was living here. No, he didn't, and he wasn't your grandfather, okay? Enough with this fabrication of history. We own history. It's ours. This is our land by right and by history. Enough already of this nonsense. We didn't come here to give it away. It's ours. Get with the program. You can defend Israel if you're willing to assert that this is Israel. You cannot defend Israel if you say, well, we have women's rights. I don't care. Tired of taking off my shoes. We have human rights. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. 9/11 happened because of you. We're going to get more and more of that because we haven't been defending ourselves for 20 years now, and it has a consequence on every single college campus. Right? It has a consequence when you have organizations like J Street that are able to say that they're pro-peace and pro-Israel when all they can do is say the United States has to end its alliance with the Jewish state. And by the way, enable Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. The lie has spread so far and so deeply. But the first place it has to stop is within us. We have to be able to say, no, this is enough is enough. Enough with this insanity, we're done. Okay, you want to know why Iraq didn't work out? It's because you think Israel is the problem and you wouldn't look at what Iraq actually is. You want to know why Egypt is such a mess? Because you have no appreciation for jihadist doctrine, because why bother studying it if you can blame the Jews for everything? And believe that the Muslim Brotherhood of all things is somehow or another a credible actor. You can't understand the region because you are blinded by an anti-Semitic narrative that is based upon the rejection of reason. So let's start thinking. That's basically what I say in my book. in a nutshell. I think you can purchase copies here, and I'll be happy to sign them. So without further ado, I want to open it up to you guys.